In this lesson, we'll use a slightly different technique to build some feet for the legs. So because we're going to have multiple legs, but they're all going to be the same, we only really have to build one. So let's start by building the sort of platform that it's going to sit on. We'll do this using curves instead of the primitive geometry that we've used up to this point. So let's go ahead and come into, this side view here. And I want to make sure that the grid is turned on. And so what we want to do is create sort of a disc shape, and we can use curves to do this. So let's go to Create, CV Curve Tool, and then let's just begin to draw out a shape. And it doesn't have to be exactly like mine, but I'm just going to kind of draw out this shape that's sort of like this, and add a few points in there, and then I'll kind of come back in close to here, and then we can kind of exit out of that. And so we have this curve. Now this isn't any sort of geometry that will render. It's basically just a NURBS curve, but from these curves we can build different kinds of geometry. So think about this as kind of a side view of the disc that we're trying to create. So we can come in here and let's use the X key to kind of snap this to the grid. So kind of snap that up, and then we can kind of move these points around. Maybe we want to sharpen up certain edges. We can move points closer together just as we would with a polygon object. It kind of works in a very similar way. When you move points closer together, you get kind of a harder edge. So in our perspective view, this is what it looks like. So just a curve sitting in space. Okay. So what we want to do is create geometry from this by rotating it around a particular axis. So we're going to be working with NURBS geometry. So let's go under the menu sets from polygons. Let's go to surfaces. Now we've got this curve selected. Let's go down to surfaces, and we want to do a revolve. So if we open up the options, you can see that we can change our axis, and we want to spin it around the x-axis to create our sort of disc shape. So we want to make sure that Y is selected. If I reset everything just to make sure it's all zeroed out, make sure that Y is selected. Okay, we'll choose a, you don't need to worry about really the surface degree. We're going to output it as NURBS. You could output it as polygons if you wanted to. You can output it as NURBS as well. It's just a different kind of geometry that you're able to work with, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we create it. Also the start and end angle. So we want it to go all the way around and create a complete surface. And so we want to go from 0 to 360 degrees. Okay. We can also change the number of segments. So 8 is going to be fine. Let's go ahead and do a revolve and see what happens. So visualize kind of where this curve is, and then we'll do a revolve. And so what's happened is it's taken this curve, rotated it around this center axis, 360 degrees, and created geometry as it follows. So we get a nice little disc shape created by this curve. Now a cool thing is that it's actually still connected based on our history. So if we were to come in with this curve and maybe select some of these CVs and pull them up, you can see that affects the overall shape. So we can still come in and modify this a little bit, and it affects the NURBS shape. Now one of the things about NURBS geometry, you're not going to be able to kind of select individual faces and extrude those out. Okay, think of it as kind of a flat sheet of geometry that has been pinched and deformed into a particular shape. Okay, also the smoothing is happening automatically. It's kind of a mathematical algorithm between points in space, and so I can access control points, but those control points lie outside the surface of the geometry. So it's kind of like when we were working with our smooth mesh, kind of like dealing with the cage for a smooth mesh in a way, but you can see how those lie off of the surface, and then that's being calculated underneath. Okay. If you're interested more in getting into the specifics of the different types of geometry, the Intro to Modeling is a good place to go to get some information about that. Just keep in mind, it's kind of one of the other types of geometry. Polygons and sub-Ds kind of go together, smooth polygons. And then the NURBS geometry is a little bit of a different sort of animal. Okay. Now, if we wanted to create an opening up here at the top, we could take this curve and take that point at the top and we can just move it off, and you can see that creates kind of a hole there because it's not going all the way into the middle. Okay. So if you want to remove the connection between the curve and the geometry, all you have to do is select the geometry and then delete the history. Now when we select our curve and move the points, you can see it doesn't have any effect. Now in order to manipulate this geometry, we would add what's called isoparms. So that's going to be these lines right in here. Okay, we're not going to be able to move the isoparms themselves, but in order to have the resolution, we need to add isoparms. So you can see as I drag from an existing isoparm, it gives me this sort of dotted yellow line. If we want to add an actual isoparm, we can go to Edit NURBS, Insert Isoparms. We could do the same thing, maybe down here. Insert isoparms. In order to move what you would think of in a polygon as sort of an edge loop, you can right-click, and the component we want to access is the hull. That gives us these kind of pink lines, and you can see how those kind of correspond with the CVs, or the control vertices that we looked at earlier. And this allows you to select a whole row of those. So we can select this whole row all the way around, and then this will allow us to kind of move that around. So if we wanted to kind of create a little bit more of a line there, or we wanted to come in here and select this one, bring this up a bit to create a base, a little bit more shape on the base, you can do that. You can also access individual CVs and move those around. All right, so try a few different curves and just go into the side or front views. Use this middle line as your axis, draw out what you think the profile should be, and then revolve it. Make sure it revolves around that correct axis, and then see if the geometry comes out as you would expect it to from the curve that you drew. And if not, go in and tweak your curve until it creates the shape that you want, and then take a look at what that curve looks like, and you'll get a better idea of how that curve is going to end up creating the geometry that you want. So next time you go in and create it, when you draw out that curve, you'll have a much better idea of what the end result will be. And then if you need to come in and modify the geometry after the fact, you can delete the history, go in and start to add isoparms and move around the holes and the vertices. All right, so we'll say that this is 1 foot. Now it's a little bit too big, so we can go ahead and center our pivot and begin to bring the scale of this down a little bit. So maybe something more like that. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and start to build the actual leg geometry. So we've got kind of the foot. Let's build the leg. And we'll use curves again. We'll use them in a little bit different way, a little bit of a different way this time. So we'll go ahead and do that next.